Welcome to America's Heroes Group, with information and resources that's disseminated intentionally to empower our military population. With host Vietnam veteran Cliff Kelley, co-host Iraq veteran Colonel Dr. Damon Arnold, and co-host Army National Guard veteran Sean Claiborne. And now, America's Heroes Group.
We have in our chase bags, we have a care package of hygiene, we have shaving equipment, we have razors, and for the women we have the same personal hygiene items for them as well. And we want to say thank you for their service. This is Chase Bank. Thank you very much. People in the neighborhood, free haircuts, and service, and food. Look good. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you. Okay.
On behalf of Cliff Kelley, America's Heroes Group, we sincerely thank Chase Bank for coming where it matters to help homeless veterans have a hot meal today and a care package. We are sincerely grateful for this partnership. Yes.
Welcome to America's Heroes Group. Hear your voice where we connect the disconnected intentionally.
Who is Cliff Kelley, the governor of talk radio, the icon of radio throughout the world.
Chauncey Spencer II and I, again, share a special relationship. His late great father, Tuskegee Airman Chauncey E. Spencer, took me as a child on my first airplane ride.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is something that people need to see. Often we don't, do the things to show how great our people are. It changes the paradigm of how people think about us, about the collective consciousness of what it means to be us.
And we've been having great conversations about trying to get more African Americans into aviation. And we got a bill that we're trying to get passed that would allow the Pell Grant to be used to help finance aviation education.
Where I started with this entire conversation by saying, if it were not for America's Heroes Group, I would have given up. I want to get all my accolades out the way on behalf of America's Heroes Group. Ms. Glenda, thank you. Thank you for encouraging me to press on. I would encourage you all to support this organization. One thing for sure, America's Hero Group is out there. Ms. Glenda will take the time. Ms. Glenda Smith will take the time to listen to you and to steer you in the direction that you need to go.
Thank you for watching another episode of America's Heroes Group, where we provide education about resources and information for our veterans, military, and their family. Thank you for watching another episode of America's Heroes Group, where we provide education about resources and information for our veterans, military, and their family. Welcome to America's Heroes Group, with information and resources that's disseminated intentionally to empower our military population, with host Vietnam veteran Cliff Kelley, co-host Iraq veteran Colonel Dr. Damon Arnold, and co-host Army National Guard veteran Sean Claiborne. And now, America's Heroes Group.
We have in our chase bags, we have a care package of hygiene, we have shaving equipment, we have razors, and for the women we have the same personal hygiene items for them as well. And we want to say thank you for their service. This is Chase Bank. Thank you very much.
People in the neighborhood, free haircuts, and service, and food. Look good. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for watching another episode of America's Heroes Group, where we provide education about resources and information.
Good afternoon. Welcome to America's Heroes Group on WVON 1690 AM, the Talk of Chicago. I am Vietnam veteran host Cliff Kelley. America's Heroes Group is a live streaming podcast, global platform, radio, print, and digital media broadcast show that empowers change agents through intentionally disseminating information, resources, and referrals to empower our military population.
And with that, welcome to America's Heroes Group, our roundtable with the Veterans Legislative Voice with Stephanie Kalota. October is Breast Cancer, Mental Health, and National Disability and Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Today is Saturday, October 22nd, 2022. Our host is Cliff Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host, Army National Guard veteran. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith. No, digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And we have a familiar voice once again, U.S. Army veteran, creator and of the Veterans Legislative Voice. And we're going to talk about some things that are coming up. We're going to talk about Food Security for All Veterans Act, and also some upcoming things with the last 30 days up until the November elections. That's something that's very important for voters. Stephanie, how you doing?
Doing good. Glad to be here.
So tell us, first of all, what is the Food Security for All Veterans Act? Because I know that's something that you wanted to talk about. And that's something very important, but it hasn't really gotten full support. It looks like it passed the House, if I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it has not passed the Senate yet.
Yes, that's correct. It's HR 8888, if I counted it right. So it's 48, full food security for all veterans, and it did pass the House. It's a very important bill, especially with what we're going through on the post-pandemic and everything that's going on with veterans. Food security is actually one of the few things that doesn't even have their own office or their own center of tracking. It's actually an additional duty for a few VA employees. So if anyone with the military understands the frustrations with additional duties, because often you don't get to spend a whole lot of time and effort on it. So this bill would create an office just to analyze and provide recommendations to the VA secretary and his undersecretaries and everything like that. So it's a really important thing. It would not cost very much, but it did go through a little bit of a rigmarole when it was going up for vote in the House. There was actually 49 Republicans that had voted against it. Which is pretty frustrating for some people because you understand how important these type of things are.
So to kind of give people some numbers, so the USDA reports that the working age vets are at greater risk for food insecurity, 7.4% of a greater risk than the general population. Also, the Military Family Advisors Network, or MFAN, otherwise known as, they did a survey a few years ago, and they surveyed 7,800 military family respondents. So veterans that are in a family, out of those households, 12.5% were food insecure. This is in 2019. So this is a pervasive problem, and you would think that, maybe you can speak to this point, you would think that when you join the military, you are in an environment where you are supported. You and your family are supported. You have allowances, you have military pay coming in, you have housing. So how is it that a lot of veterans find themselves with food insecurity?
Well, with like a lot of veterans, their disabilities, it could get the label of service connected and they can receive VA disability for it, but some of them don't get the service connected label or the service connection from the VA for VA disability because of poor documentation and support in that way. I know a few veterans that legit had injuries or serious illnesses while in service, but really struggled to get the VA to approve it. So with those issues, if those disabilities really hurt you from working or working enough or working to a level that would actually help pay for a lot of the things that a family needs. Majority of veterans have children. A lot of veterans are single parents. They're more likely to be single parents than civilians. So knowing where the issues are going on with food insecurity is really important for veterans. With those numbers between what the USDA tracks versus what the VA tracks, there's a disparity. So this office would also help try to find why there's a disparity in the survey and the research, and then they can also get better research material and data.
So it seems like a weird kind of pushback when you think about it, because from what I understand, I'm not sure what else the bill offers other than what it looks like is that one of the main things was they would create a special office to look at and assess and address food insecurity in amongst veterans in the military, because it's not just veterans, it's actually people in the military as well that are on food stamps using SNAP benefits that have food insecurity. So what is the pushback coming from? What are the arguments that people have about pushing back? We can speculate and we can get into other issues around that, but what do you see?
Honestly, there's not that much talk about it, especially from those that had voted against it, which is really frustrating. But I like to at least put out there for people to, when they hear about this, because when I've been going through the social medias on this bill and the issue with the 49 voted against, many veterans and other people have a misunderstanding of what goes on with these bills. They automatically assume, the party that's pushing for it is putting way too much money in this, or there's pork barrel spending, but they never read the bill. It's actually not going to cost very much. The VA said, no, we got the money. We just need the authorization to create the office, and we'll do everything. So it's no additional cost to the budget. There's a couple of other things that really causes misconceptions and misunderstandings with the bill. So I just wanted to use this as an example for people to understand that you can read the bills. They're not difficult to understand. They're not very long. The food insecurity bill, the text of it is probably less than 500 words.
Wow.
And yes.
That's like a newspaper article. I mean, there's newspaper articles. I've read newspaper articles longer than that.
Yeah, me too.
That's crazy. Like, when you start an article, you don't realize, you can't fit but so much space in an article. So you're always cutting my words out. But 500 words, that's for a bill, for a law?
Yes, and there's an annual report. There's bills out there that gets passed that are 200 words or less.
Wow.
So I just want to encourage everybody to try to go out and actually read these. Congress.gov, you can search, food insecurity veterans, just those keywords, and you'll find this bill. There's a lot of things. There's another thing with Congress.gov where you could see Yesterday in Congress button, which is on the main page. You could see all of the bills that gets introduced, gets passed in every chamber of Congress, and you can go back months on that actually, so you can actually see how things go. there's been a lot of bills that's been passing in the last 30 days because we're getting up to the congressional session, the end of it, with the election coming up. So there's a huge push for a lot of bills to go through. So there's a lot of things to come through here because, of course, the people that are running for Congress, again, which will be all of the representatives, 435 of them, and a portion of the senators. So they want to get these bills passed so they could say, hey, I'm trying to help you guys out with my constituents and try to get that out there so more people can vote for them. And I want to encourage everybody to go out and look for these types of things to see where your elected officials are actually voting, co-sponsoring, supporting, introducing, and you can even look up debates. You could Google this. You could Google the bill, Google the day of the debate, and C-SPAN will come up, and you can actually listen to them talk about the bills, and you learn a lot of stuff that way.
So the Food Security for All Veterans Act is what you can research and Google online at congress.gov, and also just Google it, and you can see like Stephanie said, the C-SPAN debates. You can also read about the bill on congress.gov, and then also other legislation that's important to veterans. Because this is the thing that I'm concerned with, is that our elected officials, are they just using or pandering to the veteran community just to get votes for an election time? We're 30 days out from November elections. So that being said, what do you see as who's really has a focus on real veteran issues to really solve problems rather than just kick the can down the road or pass a bill that, maybe that doesn't do as much as it could?
Yeah, no, that's really important to look up and watch. One of my favorite senators to watch. I'm not a huge fan of him, but I love to at least watch him and see what he does and what he submits. He submitted a bill to pass to actually give the benefit of free national parks admission to Gold Star families. And I laughed because they already have that.
Wow.
And I was like, seriously, you're just trying to make yourself look good by putting in something that's already been passed.
But that shows incompetence. I mean, that shows.
Yeah.
I always believe a lot of our Congress is incompetent anyway. There's a lot of stuff that they could be doing, and not just. Across the board. I mean, the courts get more incompetent to me. It seems like, Brett Kavanaugh can't even defend himself against a rape charge from 30 years ago. Looking like an idiot on congressional hearings, and you have, I can go on and on. I'm not a big fan of Biden either. Biden's polls are in the toilet right now, although there's no real alternatives out there that are really showing themselves to really be a true leader and have the country's best interest at heart. And I think that turns people off from politics altogether a lot of times. So then you have these fringe guys that come out of the woodwork like a Donald Trump or whomever. The next one might be a cult of personality that steps forward and says, whatever you want to hear.
Yep.
I'll be
and
that guy.
It's so true.
Or that gal.
It happens so much. There's another bill I do want to talk about. It's already become a law, so and that it touches on a lot of those things that you've mentioned. The Solid Start Act of 2022. It just became law. There has been some frustrations with it. So the Solid Start Act is an expansion of a previous one of the same name in a different congressional session. What it basically does is outreach to veterans, because only a fraction of veterans actually uses the VA, that goes and gets enrolled, checks out what it's all about, because everybody have a misconception of how bad it was, because you know what, they do suck a lot of times. So it's kind of frustration. So veterans do avoid the VA, or they don't understand what the VA could do for them. So this bill is basically an outreach of requiring the VA to contact the veteran 3 times following their service for the first year of them transitioning from service. So it's one of those things that really helps out on awareness. And one of the reasons why this bill has gotten some attention was because they've had a lot of amendments. Bills go back and forth between chambers, and they'll do some slight changes. And then after everything was already happy and good and just needed an additional approval from the House, Representative Mike Bost, which is a House Republican from your state of Illinois, he decided to try to lead the pro-life caucus against this bill because VA had changed their policy in allowing abortion care for veterans who are victims of rape, incest, or it's for the life and health of the mother. So a lot of Republicans from the VA committee has gotten really angry about that decision. And the problem that they have with this bill is that this bill would actually include telling women veterans the information that is tailored to their specific health care and benefit needs, which is reproductive care, which is cancer screening, which is abortion care. So Representative Goss led a group to try to get this part removed so that the VA wouldn't be advertising that they can do abortion care now.
I think it seems to me that when you're in the military, you're used to being told everything what to do and where to be and when to sign up and when to stand in formation and so on. But then once you leave the military, all that stops abruptly. Nobody really takes your hand and says, okay, these are the benefits and things that are available to you. These are the things you can do. These are the resources around you. These are veteran service organizations. This is how they work. This is the VA system. This is how this works. And it's a complicated system to begin with. So
yes.
So this
it's scary.
Yeah, and it can be. It can be daunting. It can be scary, and frustrating because when people that seem to use VA services are people that really are in need of VA services, from what I've seen. So people that are trying to get disability ratings, people that have disability ratings, that also have ailments that really can't really get treated as well or as thoroughly in a civilian hospital. Because maybe they've never seen Agent Orange, or they're not familiar with Agent Orange as well as the VA system does, or some of this toxic exposure stuff that we're seeing with the burn pits, and some of the signs and symptoms of that. So what people in Congress are actually, once again, serious about trying to make life better for veterans? Because to me, because we have a Congress, first of all, that's less and less a veteran population, so less and less of our veterans are being elected to office.
Yes, very true.
Presidents, I think the last, 3 presidents we've had, maybe 4, have not served.
Yep.
Then all of a sudden now they're in charge of the most powerful military in the world, and they're president.
Yes.
They've never fired a weapon on the battlefield, never, went to basic training or anything like that. No clue what it's like to be a soldier or sailor or whatever. So that being said, so who's got our back? Who's got our back in the government?
Oh, so it's those that you got to watch out for or look for, really. And even some of the Congress people that are on some of these committees, especially for the Committee of Veterans Affairs, Representative Mark Takano is someone that I love so much because he does so much support for the veterans, and he has never served. Representative Jackie Spear never served, but she is a champion, especially for women in the military, for military sexual trauma. She tried so hard for years and decades to try to get them to get more protections against military sexual trauma, and she's been amazing, and she never served. She actually was in the Jonestown shooting when she was an aide for the representative that died.
Wow.
The only congressperson that has ever died while serving in that manner had been murdered, and so it was crazy. She actually got shot 5 times and survived.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
So some really amazing people out there that you could just try to go out and watch these committees. You learn a whole lot when you talk to them. One of the champions for this Solid Start Act was actually Representative Slotkin. She is a former federal employee, but her husband was also in the military. So she observed and got to see firsthand everything from an outside eye, really, of what was going on and what he experienced and what he went through. The Solid Start Act to me is really great because it also makes sure that trained professionals are calling these veterans and helping them understand what's available to them. When I first called up my local VA to find out how to get started, because I never got that information because I was a reservist and I got back from deployment, I called my local VA and they told me, oh, just bring your husband, honey, and we'll walk him through everything. And I'm like, it's for me.
That's crazy.
And I turned off the phone. I just hung up on them, and I never went to the VA for another 3 years. And I had to file a VA disability claim to get percentage, so then I can enroll in the VA. Because if you don't do it within a certain time frame when you get out of the military, if you don't have a VA rating, then you don't get care. You can't get enrolled.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that goes on with that can be very frustrating.
Once again, I got to get my soapbox.
Yeah, I know,
It's coming,
right?
Stephanie.
I know, you say it every time, and I completely agree.
So we have to fight for. It's like you go to a regular civilian job. You sign up for the
Yeah.
insurance you get. You sign up for the insurance. It's no big deal. You sign up for the insurance and they cover whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that you have to prove every little thing with the military? And I think this is the thing. This is where I think Congress. Why I think Congress is out of touch. Is because that is something they should really correct. First of all, it's not even a money issue. The military force today is a fraction of what it was during World War II.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
I mean, it's a fraction of what it was. It's not like you're covering 20 million soldiers or 20 million, service members. It's like less than 3 million. I know it's way less than 3 million. It might be like close to 2, I think, is it? 1.8, something like that.
Yeah, and then and total veteran populations have been dropping by millions because the generations that we've had so many veterans are now dying off.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So we're going to have a much smaller veteran population in the next couple of years because very few World War II veterans are still living. Same with Korean War. Some of them are outliving the veterans from the Vietnam War because of all the toxic exposures they've had.
Wow.
So it's going to be an interesting thing that happens in the future, and that might be a good possibility of expanding the VA healthcare for all because they might need the numbers.
Right.
They might need that to keep going.
And that's the thing. So we know recruitment. We struggle with recruitment for so many years, and part of it is because of the wars that we fought. The wars that we fought. I mean, you go into Afghanistan 20 years later. Afghanistan is still the same as it was 20 years before. All the thousands of people that passed away, that died, unfortunately, which my heart goes out to those families and those people that sacrificed their lives in the name of our country, in the name of freedom. However, the situation they started with is the same situation that they got when they left. And then leaving Afghanistan was a disaster. But that's definitely right at time, unfortunately. We got to talk about this more in detail when you come back. And then go into my soapbox again, as we always do. So,
You're good. Yes, I'd love to talk more next time because the elections will be coming up, and I should be back next week, and we'll have a part 2 more about understanding your elected officials before you go vote.
Stephanie Kalota, U.S. Army veteran, creator of the Veterans Legislative Voice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.
Thank you for watching another episode of America's Heroes Group, where we provide education about resources and information for our veterans, military, and their family.
Welcome back to America's Heroes Group. This time with our roundtable community outreach with the NADCP, the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. October is Breast Cancer, Mental Health, National Disability, and Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Today is Saturday, October 22nd, 2022. Our host is Cliff Kelley. You heard at the break. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host, Army National Guard veteran. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And we have our panelists with us on the Zoom. We're going to be talking about some things. We're going to be talking about the Justice for Vets and how it works, and the value in vets mentoring vets, and how other key issues and how mentorship and also justice for veterans is so important. Now, Mark Panelist, I'm going to mess up your last name. Panelist. Panelist, U.S. Air Force veteran and project director with Justice for Vets. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing today? Can you hear me okay?
Hear you great. Loud and clear.
Great.
So let me know, what is the Justice for Vets about? First of all, tell us about the program, how it got started. Tell us, what is this program doing for veterans today?
Well, Justice for Vets.
Looks like we froze up a little bit, so we got to get him back on the line. We got to get him back in about 10 seconds. So let's see. Is Mark, Mark, you there? Can you hear us? Just give us a call back. So Mark is a U.S. Air Force veteran. He's also has a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Michigan Technical University. He has a master's in clinical social work from Michigan State University, and also was involved in the Keniwa Bay Indian Community Healing to Wellness Court, which is drug court, from 2011 to 2018. And he specialized in Tribal Law and Policy Institute since 2014. And he currently serves as a product director for the Justice for Vets, a division of the National Association of Drug Courts Professionals. So this is something we wanted to talk about because of the fact that a lot of veterans find themselves in situations where, unfortunately, with substance abuse or drug addiction, they find themselves in the court system. And what we found, the reason we're having this conversation is what we found, the data has shown over many years, is that you could spend less money and get better results by providing treatment versus providing punishment, just focusing on punishment, figuring out a way to help people learn from their mistakes and do better so they can be better citizens. Mark, you with us again?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm trying to get the Zoom connected back up, but I've got the audio back up. So while I'm trying to get my Zoom back up, I'll tell you what I was starting to say, which is basically the Justice for Vets is a division of NADCP, which is the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. And what we do is we travel around and offer training opportunities to veterans treatment courts, and try to get them to follow the best practice and the evidence-based practices that have been established, and so that they can do the absolute best they can do for their vets.
So when you're going through drug treatment court, people have to have first of all, you need to understand that it's not an easy process. From what I understand, it's a lot. It's going to try you. A lot of people don't make it through. A lot of people rather go to jail sometimes than go through this program because they have is it a choice that they can go either through the program, or is it more of an opportunity where they're offered the ability to go through the program?
It's always an opportunity. It's always a choice. Okay. They don't ever force somebody to go in there. It's not usually court ordered. It's a volunteer program. Oftentimes they will take the advantage because there's carrots to doing it. And one of the big carrots is a lot of times their record can be cleaned up or expunged, or their sentencing can be less. And so that's a big part of that. The overall result is, of course, giving them back their lives. And letting them be reintegrated back into society, and again, letting them have that honor and integrity that they had while they were serving, too.
So you work with the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community Healing to Wellness Court, which is drug court. How has that experience, can you relate that experience to what you've seen with veterans? Some of the struggles that Native Americans have, and a lot of communities are disenfranchised or are low to moderate income, or just don't have the opportunities out there. How have you seen success in that arena versus how do you relate that to the Veterans Court?
Well, they're both the same model. The big difference is that the difference in the model is that is that one is, of course, working with Native American populations, and the other one is working with veteran populations. And so one of the things that the Healing and Wellness Court figured out quite a long time ago, and that would be that it takes a community to help somebody get through that kind of a process. And that's what we're doing with veterans. That's why the difference between a veterans treatment court and an adult drug court, say, is that we have mentors. And the mentors are kind of that secret component that helps the veterans get through the court by offering them in support and encouraging them and empowering them and all that. And 99% of the time, the veterans, the mentors are all voluntary.
So how do you pick or find mentors?
Well, the courts find them. We don't find them. What we do is we train them at Justice for Vets. We help train the mentors. And so a lot of times the courts reach out to their veteran populations. Sometimes they go through the VA. Sometimes they go through organizations like the Lions Club or those kind of places, or even veterans organizations. Team Red, White, and Blue is one where they can sometimes get mentors, or the VFW or the American Legion. All those are places that they can find people that want to volunteer and help out fellow veterans. And so that's how they usually find them. And what we do at Justice for Vets is we help train them so that the mentors have the understanding of boundaries and understand what role they're going to play and not to get out of their lane, so to speak. A lot of times when the veterans hear that they're going to be advocating for veterans, we want to make sure they understand what that advocation means. And that's encouraging them and supporting them and that kind of stuff. That's what we want to make sure we see.
And who are these veterans or the mentors? I'm sorry. Are they normally people that maybe have been on that path themselves, or are they people that are just charitable and want to help out?
They're both. We've seen mentors that come through have actually graduated from veterans treatment courts and then turn around after they have a term of recovery to turn around and start volunteering. We also see mentors that have never had a substance use issue. Who volunteer and everything. Because one of the things they found when they look at the component there for Veterans Treatment Court is that it's about the culture. And you said you were an Army vet, right, sir?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. Well, I was Air Force. All right. So immediately when we say that, I can see in your face right now, you can think of all the jokes you can make about Air Force, right? How easy we had it, how light it was, right?
If I'd done it again, I would have joined the Air Force.
Exactly. And we all make fun of Marines, right? Right. And because that's part of military culture. The same way when we talk about MREs and boot camp and all those things that we can bring up that people that haven't served don't necessarily, they may have heard of them, but they might not necessarily understand them. Even something as saying embrace the suck, or an MOS. And so that's the importance of those mentors, is that they help people bridge that gap of culture and help non-veterans understand what they're doing when they're working with veterans. And the other thing is it gives that common bond for the veteran, that's the participant in the program, to know that there's somebody there, that there's somebody there that isn't associated with the court, because they're not a member of the court. The mentors are volunteer, and they're there really just to encourage and empower. And I think that's where we see the strength come up from it.
So do you see this expanding? Because I want to touch on this particular point. I mentioned this earlier, but I think the key thing why I'm excited about this idea is because of treatment courts. It's because the success rate is so much higher than the regular civilian population or the regular criminal justice system. When you have the recidivism rates that are so much lower, but it's a fraction of the cost of the regular criminal justice system. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, the studies show over and over and over again that the locking people up does not help them with their mental health issues, and it doesn't help them with their substance use.
It's like we froze up a little bit again. Yep, we lost him. So you got to call us back a little bit, Mark. So we lost Mark a little bit for a second or so. So one of the things that there you are. There you're back. You're back with us. You froze up a little bit. So repeat what you just said because you froze up a little bit.
Okay, what I said is that of course they work, because when we look at studies, we can see that. We can see that recidivism is less, and that if throwing somebody in prison or jail worked, then we could just throw them in prison and they'd be cured, but that hasn't worked. We've seen that. It doesn't work. And so they keep having this revolving door. And so when we look at this, we can see that it absolutely does work. And that's why treatment courts are popular. That's why they're flourishing. And the other thing is with veterans treatment courts, we're definitely seeing a difference with the mentors, so much so that the adult treatment courts now are starting to do peer support mentors. because they see that culture is important and that bond and that encouragement and empowerment is really a big part of this.
So do you see this expanding? What is the growth rate of these treatment courts, and how can we do more to expand it? Or, in all honesty, I don't see why we don't do this all the time. This should be the model from what I can see.
Well, that's absolutely right. It should be the model, and they are growing and they are expanding. If you look at the number of treatment courts, even from 5 years ago today, you'll see that they're expanding. A big part of it is just educating. You know, I think that's a huge part of why treatment courts haven't caught on in some places, is because a lot of people get the wrong idea of what they are. They think that a treatment court is light on crime, or it's going to be some easy process, or somebody's being able to manipulate a system, and they don't realize the intensity that happens not only with the treatment that's involved, because remember, we're talking about a treatment court, you know, but also about the supervision. You know, one of the things I've always seen is you'll see people say things like, well, if somebody has a domestic violence, then they shouldn't be in treatment court. And the example I always use with that is this. Okay, if somebody has domestic violence and they go to jail, they might go to jail for 6 months, maybe. And that's if the victim doesn't press charges at all and gets them right back out anyways, because majority of the time that's exactly what happens. And so now we have somebody that does their 6 months in jail, gets out, still has their mental health issues, still has their substance use issues, and now they're unsupervised. Okay? To me, that doesn't make any community safer. Or we can put them into a highly intensive program that lasts 18 months. Okay? Usually a minimum of 18 months, and that's if they do it perfectly. Oftentimes, it's much longer than 18 months, and during that 18 months, they're reporting to court once a week. They're reporting to our probation officer once a week. Every time they step out of line, even a little bit, they're going to get sanctioned, and when they do something right, they're going to get incentivized. Plus, we're going to make sure that they're going to treatment weekly. We're making sure that they're going to groups. To me, that sounds like something that's going to make a community a heck of a lot safer than throwing somebody in jail for maybe 6 months and nothing changing. Mm-hmm. You know, and so that's what we look at.
So what I'm hearing is accountability is what is a key focus on the program. Making sure everybody's accountable for what their actions. You give them, like you said, a carrot for, you know, to give them a incentive to try to move forward. And then really, and this is, we've talked about this in other segments in the past, but a person gets to a certain point where they're just sick and tired of being sick and tired. They're sick and tired of being at rock bottom. And they're looking for a way to get off of rock bottom, but they just don't have the tools or mechanism around them or the support system around them to do it. And this kind of gives them
that's a great point you brought up, too. That's a great point, because that was the belief for a long time. The belief for a long time is that somebody has to hit absolutely rock bottom before anything can change. Now, if you think about it, what's the absolute rock bottom?
Like low job? Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, death is death.
No, death. Death is the absolute rock bottom.
You're under 6 feet under.
Okay, so how do... That's what I mean. So how do we help somebody recover from that point? I mean, so we're basically telling somebody you may have to die before we can do anything. And so what they've actually found out now is instead of trying to push that rock bottom, that what we found out is it's not a rock bottom that makes the difference. It's absence of hope. When somebody gets hope that there might be something different and there's hope that something can happen, that's when we start seeing real change. And that's one of the things that treatment courts are learning now and teaching, is that recovery capital is much more important than rock bottoms. And the same thing with a veterans treatment court. I mean, a lot of times the reason why they're where they're at is their hope lifts. It's not because they need to hit more rock bottom. And that's one of those things when we look at the mentors. The mentors can come in and be that source of, hey, look, I haven't been where you're at, but I'm telling you there's hope. And if anything, I'm here to lend that hand to let you grab out to. And I think that's what makes that huge difference between the veterans treatment courts and other ones. But it's absolutely about finding hope now. You know, not so much let's hit rock bottom, or, you know, there's another belief that they had to want it. That was the other thing. They have to want it.
Wow.
And that's, again, been proven kind of false. What they've shown is that somebody that is coerced or forced into treatment does just as well as somebody that goes voluntarily. There is no difference in the recovery numbers when we look at that.
Really? So a person who's forced into a treatment has the same success rate as someone who voluntarily goes in?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So if I'm your everyday, you know, Joe on the street and I decide to go to treatment, my success rate is the exact same as somebody that had some pressure put on them by a court, you know, and was given the option of go to jail for 8 months or go to treatment. That person will do as equally as well as me. The results are the exact same.
Wow.
And that's why they're saying more and more about it's more about a presence of hope than a rock bottom. And the same thing when we look at that, when we look at the justice involved vets, that's what it comes down to. Is it really comes down to a mentoring process that helps them. and give them that. And I'm not disregarding the rest of the court, because the whole court is what makes it work. But that one key component really does come down to those mentors. So
when a person goes into treatment court, they don't go to jail typically, right? They get to go back home pretty much. Now, are they under house arrest? Do they have an ankle bracelet? How does the monitoring work?
It all depends on how the courts do it, but the way they usually do it is they structure it with a phase program. And so with each phase, there's a little bit more supervision. So when you first start out in the program, there's going to be a lot more supervision. And then depending on the behaviors of the veteran or the participant is going to depend on whether or not supervision increases or decreases. So if when they first get out, they're doing everything good and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're following the rules of the program, then no, they're not going to do increased supervision. Now, if all of a sudden I'm breaking my curfew every night, that I'm supposed to be home at 10 o'clock, so the first time I break it, well, number one, it's going to get brought up in court, which is weekly. We're not talking monthly, we're talking weekly. All right? And so it gets brought up in court, and then I get sanctioned. And maybe the judge is going to say, you know what, because you broke curfew, you're going to go pick up garbage on the side of the road for the next 2 hours. All right? And we're going to put an anklet bracelet on you so we can keep track of you. And then that might happen for, a couple weeks, and then they might say, okay, we're going to try this again. We'll take the bracelet off, and we'll see what you can do, and that's how that works. And then if they do really well and they meet their curfew, then there's usually some kind of reward. Oftentimes it's praise from the judge or things like that, or it might be a small incentive for doing the right thing. And that's exactly how the program works.
So
now, does jail happen? Jail can happen, but we don't recommend jail. The studies have shown that jail does not solve people. Matter of fact, a lot of times jail undoes treatment, and so when we're trying to work with somebody to, treat them and give them new tools, when we put them in jail, that actually can undo that. Wow. And so that's why the studies actually show that you shouldn't put somebody in jail for more than 5 days. Otherwise, after 7 days, you actually start trying to fix. So that's kind of like the last result.
So why is that? Well, I've heard of situations where for people that are not necessarily in have a substance abuse problem, or maybe they're have an alcohol problem or a drug problem, or I heard of non-addicted people going into prison and getting, it's like a college for criminals. That's what people would call it. So they learn from other criminals, because you're surrounded by other criminals that are doing all kinds of different things, sometimes even gang activity inside the prisons, where you learn how to be a better criminal. So you come out not necessarily, and then you come out of the prison and then you have this record now, so you can't really integrate back into society the same way as you did before. So the easiest path, like water flowing to the path of least resistance, the easiest path to getting what you want, to try to meet your needs and try to have some kind of success, is going back into the criminal element. So, but what is it with a person who has a substance abuse problem? Because you would think that the more time they're away from using the drugs, that maybe they might have a better shot of being sober. So the misunderstanding here, and this is the problem that we see over and over again, is people keep forgetting that a substance use disease is just that, it's a disease. So it's not a choice. And so when we say, well, if we throw somebody in jail and they're away from a long enough period of time, then that should make choice different. But the problem is the neural pathways on the brain, and that's what really we're looking at. When we're looking at substance use disorder, we're looking at a neural pathway in the brain that actually buys logical thought. That's the basics of it, okay? And that's why when we see people that have substance use disorders doing things that are absolutely crazy, and we look at them and we either have to say, well, they're either crazy, or doing crazy behaviors, or they're just horrible people. Because a lot of times the stuff they're doing is harmful to other people. They're stealing from loved ones or neglecting children and all that stuff. So when we look at the fact that it's actually a fact that they have a difficulty making logical thought, that's what it comes down to. And they've got brain scans that show that people that have a substance use disorder, the frontal lobe of the brain just isn't firing right. And so when we treat them, what we're doing is just like somebody has a stroke. When somebody has a stroke and they lose the ability to speak, that's because the neural pathway that goes to the speech center has been damaged. And what we do is we send them to rehab and we send them to speech therapy, and we work on creating a new neural pathway so that they can access their speech again. Well, the same thing happens when we work with somebody who has substance use disorder. We're trying to create a new neural pathway so they can access logical thought again. That's what the whole point of it is. So if we just throw them in jail and we never do any physical treatment, it'd be like throwing somebody in jail that had a stroke, that couldn't talk. If we just stick them in jail, they're not
not going to be able to talk when they get out 2 years later.
Wow.
You know? And so what we really want to do is do that neural pathway and create it. And here's the thing is when we stick somebody in jail and we've been working on that neural pathway, when we put them in jail, that's a really negative place, and everybody in there is going to encourage them to use the bad pathway, the one that got them in here in the first place, that illogical thought pathway. And so we're actually undoing the one we've already created, and that's why jail just doesn't work. And that's why we need to continue to treat.
So going back to
and I'm not saying – oh, go ahead.
No, going back to what we talked about, what you mentioned earlier. So people are human. They make mistakes. They sometimes fall off the wagon. So what are the consequences for falling off the wagon? You mentioned increased surveillance or increased supervision, but is it because someone might be afraid that if given my history, given my past, I tried many times to get off of drugs and I just blew it up completely, wrecked my whole recovery process. What are the consequences for failing?
So the way it works when we look at treatment courts, all right, and veterans treatment courts and adult treatment courts, is we look at everything as proximal and distal goals, okay? And what we mean by that is if you look at me, I'm a little bit of a chubby guy, right? And if you said, hey, Mark, we want you to go run a marathon. Well, for me, that would be a very distal goal. That's not something I'm going to be able to do right away. And if you looked at me and said, Mark, if you don't run this marathon, we're going to punish you, more than likely I'm going to get punished, and that's not really fair, okay? But if you said, Mark, listen, we want you to walk half a mile today. Well, that's proximal. I should be able to do a half a mile. Now, if I choose not to do that, then, yeah, I should probably get some kind of sanction. When we look at people with substance use disorder, that's the same thing. When they're first coming in the program, expecting them to be sober right off the get-go is an unrealistic thing, okay? And so if they while they come into the program, yes, we are going to sanction them because we want to change behavior, but those sanctions are going to be very light, and we're going to be more treatment-focused, meaning that we recognize that you need more treatment so you have no new skills and new ability to make different decisions. So instead of punishing, we're going to look for more about treating. Let's treat you. Now, once they get to a point where they've established they have some recovery time in or some sober time and they can establish that they can do some time without using, that's when the punishment starts more about using. So once you've established that you can be sober and you've got some new tools, but you're still occasionally using the wrong ones, that's when the punishment will increase. So there's not a treatment court out there that's going to just throw the book at somebody the first time they come in and use. That's insanity. You know, if these people could stop using, they wouldn't need a treatment court. You know what I mean? I was a clinical director of an inpatient treatment facility, and I've seen some facilities say we got to be drug-free for 2 weeks before you can come into a treatment center. I mean, to me, that's insanity. If they can go drug-free for 2 weeks, they probably don't need to be in the treatment center in the first place, or you're encouraging them to lie to you. That's what you're telling them. You're saying, listen, lie to us and then come in. And again, that's giving the wrong message because we're trying to promote honesty and health, but we're telling somebody, if you want to get in here, you got to lie, you know? And so that's why treatment courts aren't designed that way, you know?
Do you think...
We're not saying we own substance use, but we are saying that we understand that you need help before you're going to get better.
Do you think that some of the mistakes that we've made, and particularly with treatment around drugs, because I remember when you said that, it reminds me of the Nancy Reagan campaign back in the 80s with Just Say No. They had Nancy
Just Say No.
Went on national television and said, well, there's a horrible thing going around right now. It's called drugs. You know, don't do it. Just don't do it. Just say no.
Yeah.
If it was that easy, but not recognizing and understanding a lot of the pressures and the societal issues, economic issues, and all the things that go around with it that force people into making these types of habits and these decisions. Now, once I mean, one hit of heroin and you're hooked. That's it. That's all it takes. A lot of these drugs, these hardcore drugs, one hit is all it takes for you to be addicted for life. Your body will be chemically changed and altered where you will need that drug. Otherwise, you will get very, very sick. So
yeah, absolutely.
So what caused this? A lot of the bad ideas. Was it just negligence, or or maybe this bad philosophy? From your perspective,
I think it's bad philosophy, and I think that. So I'll give you an example. Here's the example I always like to give. All right, let's say that your name is Sarah, and you have cancer, Sarah, and it's horrible. So horrible cancer you have, and you have 2 kids, but you haven't been able to work. You haven't really been able to take care of your kids because you're going through chemo treatments. It's just you are in really rough shape. You lost your job, so you're having problems keeping your lights on and feeding your kids. social services comes in and says, listen, Sarah, we got to take the kids. We got to remove them because you're in a position where you just can't do this right now. All right. But I promise you, when you get better and you beat the cancer, we're going to do everything we can to help you get your kids back. So it happens. Sarah's kids get removed. Sarah goes through her treatment, gets better. Sarah goes back to the worker, goes, hey, everything's good. I'm working again. All good. The worker says, let's go. We're going to get your kids back. We're going to work on it. Get your kids back. Everything's hunky-dory. Okay? That's a great story for Sarah because Sarah has cancer. Do we treat Sarah that way if she's a heroin addict?
Hell no.
No, we don't. We treat her like she's got choice, that she's doing these horrible things, and that she's just a horrible person. We don't treat her like it's a disease, and that's where the problem is that we're dealing with a disease. We're not dealing with a choice. That's why the just say no doesn't work so well, It's easy to say just say no when you're, in Bel Air in a mansion. It's hard to just say no when, you're in the hood and you're afraid to walk into school and, all sorts of other aspects that come up to that. Or you've been being abused for half your life. It's hard to just say no. And so I think when we can start changing our own mindset on it being a disease, because everybody will say, oh, it's a disease, but we don't treat people like it's a disease. We treat people like it's a choice and like they're doing something that's just horrible.
Wow. I think that's really profound what you mentioned. I think that's very true in our society. We have a society that likes to punish versus treat or correct problems. So we get caught up in this idea of punishment and not realizing, that it's an endless cycle. We never fixed a problem by just constantly focusing on punishment. If the person is not given an opportunity to do something different or to get out of their addiction, then you would expect the same result. So we have to do more to expand these courts. We have to get, like I said, this is the model. Once again, going back to the original premise at the top of the show, this is more effective and it costs less. I mean, that's a no-brainer. More effective costs less. 10 times more effective, multiples of more effective. We're not talking like just 20% more or whatever. Multiples more effective and a fraction of the cost. I'm going to mess up your last name one more time. Mark Panelist, how do you say? Panishevitz. Thanks for your time. We appreciate you. Justice for Vets.
All right. Thank you, sir.
This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.
Welcome to America's Heroes Group, with information and resources that's disseminated intentionally to empower our military population, with host Vietnam veteran Cliff Kelley, co-host Iraq veteran Colonel Dr. Damon Arnold, and co-host Army National Guard veteran Sean Claiborne. And now, America's Heroes Group.
We have in our chase bags, we have a care package of hygiene, we have shaving equipment, we have razors, and for the women we have the same personal hygiene items for them as well. And we want to say thank you for their service. This is Chase Bank. Thank you very much.
People in the neighborhood, free haircuts, and service and food. Look good. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service.
Okay. On behalf of Cliff Kelley, America's Heroes Group, we sincerely thank Chase Bank for coming where it matters to help homeless veterans have a hot meal today and a care package. We are sincerely grateful for this partnership.
Welcome to America's Heroes Group. Hear your voice where we connect the disconnected intentionally.
Who is Cliff Kelley, the governor of talk radio, the icon of radio throughout the world?
Chauncey Spencer II and I, again, share a special relationship. His late great father, Tuskegee Airman Chauncey E. Spencer, took me as a child on my first airplane ride.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is something that people need to see. Often we don't, do the things to show how great our people are. It changes the paradigm of how people think about us, about the collective consciousness of what it means to be us.
And we've been having great conversations about trying to get more African Americans into aviation. And we got a bill that we're trying to get passed that would allow the Pell Grant to be used to help finance aviation education.
Where I started with this entire conversation by saying, if it were not for America's Heroes Group, I would have given up. So I want to get all my accolades out the way on behalf of America's Heroes Group. Ms. Glenda, thank you. Thank you for encouraging me to press on. I would encourage you all to support this organization. One thing for sure, America's Hero Group is out there. Ms. Glenda will take the time. Ms. Glenda Smith will take the time to listen to you and to steer you in the direction that you need to go.
Thank you for watching another episode of America's Heroes Group, where we provide education about resources and information for our veterans, military, and their family. Thank you for watching another episode of America's Heroes Group, where we provide education about resources and information for our veterans, military, and their family. Welcome to America's Heroes Group, with information and resources that's disseminated intentionally to empower our military population, with host Vietnam veteran Cliff Kelley, co-host Iraq veteran Colonel Dr. Damon Arnold, and co-host Army National Guard veteran Sean Claiborne. And now, America's Heroes Group.
We have in our chase bags, we have a care package of hygiene, we have shaving equipment, we have razors, and for the women we have the same personal hygiene items for them as well. And we want to say thank you for their service. This is Chase Bank. Thank you very much.
People in the neighborhood, free haircuts, and service, and food. Look good. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service.
And welcome back to America's Heroes Group with our roundtable with the state of Indiana partner DAV. That DAV stands for Disabled American Veterans. October is Breast Cancer, Mental Health, National Disability, and Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Today is Saturday, October 22nd, 2022, 2222. Our host is Cliff Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Production. And we also have in our studio engineer, Lady J, a.k.a. Jada. Always holding it down. And we have a partner on the line, Bob Carnegie. He's a U.S. Army veteran from Vietnam and an Indiana State Commander of the Disabled American Veterans. And we're going to talk about the State of Indiana DAV, the end of year agenda, and the November 11th, Veterans Day agenda as well. So how you doing, Bob?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. So tell us, what do you have going on for Veterans Day?
Well, for me personally, I've got about a week worth of things to do. But the most important thing I can mention is that the day after Veterans Day, which is the 12th of November, at the Hard Rock Casino in Gary, Indiana, we are going to have a tribute dinner to the Middle East veterans.
Wow.
Yeah, the sponsors of that are the DAV of Indiana and the Hard Rock Casino.
So this is for Operation Desert Storm, Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Correct.
Okay, so yeah, so that's pretty good. So then now, what is? I'm getting.
No, sorry. Go on.
I was trying to get my attention. I'm trying to focus on two things. So let us know, what are some of the events you have planned for that day?
Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do, there is a special place in Marseille, Illinois, that is the Middle East Conflicts Memorial, and it is fundamentally it's the Middle East Vietnam Wall, and it's built along the Illinois River, and it lists all the names from the military that have been killed while we've been fighting in the Middle East. And every year they add additional names and additional stones to cover that memorial. And it was started several years ago by the Illinois Motorcycle Association, and they're the ones that built it. And it was no funds from the state or federal government, all from the Illinois Motorcycle Riders Association, and they have a ride every year. It is an impressive facility on the banks of the Illinois River, as I mentioned. And we have the ability to look up names by rock or display devices, which there are probably 10 or 12 of them that hold all the names. So there's a computer there. It's lit up at night. It's absolutely fabulous. Well, the gentleman who founded it has passed away. But his wife and the secretary of that particular location will be with us on the 12th. We've got going to do some special things to display what they do there, and that'll be the way we start off the evening.
I got to check this out because it sounds beautiful. So, and also it's very important to recognize those veterans from Afghanistan, Iraq, from the first war in Iraq, because oftentimes there's just so much, I want to say bad publicity or bad press. We hear about the 22-a-day suicides, even though most of those are not necessarily the Middle East veterans. We also have the new era of multiple deployments, where a lot of these guys and women have been on these multiple deployments, which was unheard of. It's never been done really in military history. We've going on 5, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10 tours.
Right.
And the mental toll that has on you. And then
I have a good friend who's a first sergeant in the National Guard today. He's got over 9 deployments.
Wow.
And this wall is called the Middle East Conflicts Wall Memorial. And it's in, as I said, Marseille, Illinois, right on the Illinois River. So it's not far from us, not far from you guys in Chicago, not far from me in Northwest Indiana. And I can tell you that you can look it up on the web and just get a flavor of it. You need to see it because it is very, very, very special. And the same thing happens at that wall as happens at the Vietnam Wall. Guys will come and look up names, do etchings, the charcoal etching of the name plate per se, and take that with them as a memorial. It has an effect on people of going to visit their brothers. Mm-hmm. And as long as their names are etched on a memorial like this, and we go and say their name, they're still with us. Hmm. So it's something that I talked to a group of National Guardsmen today, and I said, this is your Vietnam Veterans Wall. This is where you guys go for healing, and it's 80 miles away from us in Northwest Indiana, probably 75 miles from you folks in Chicago. And I'm shocked at how many people have never been there.
I've never heard of it, to be honest with you. This is the first time I've actually heard of it. I didn't realize.
I know. I talked about it about a year ago on this show with Cliff one time, but it bears repeating because people just don't know it exists. So that's going to be the first thing we start off that evening, and we've got 2 speakers that will speak. The first person that will talk is from the Road Home, which you guys know very well. And that's the organization that's part of Rush Medical Center that does work specific to veterans for PTSD, TBI, and sexual trauma in the military. And they partner with a loosely knit organization between UCLA, Harvard Medical, and Tufts in Atlanta. So veterans that are suffering from those things can go to pick up the phone, call Rush Road Home, and literally go there for 14 days, no charge whatsoever, and get help.
Wow.
And their director, Will Beardsdorf, will be with us that evening. I've known Will for quite a while, and Will has served in the Army and in the Navy, and he has a desire second to none for helping veterans. And then after he speaks, we're going to have Jessica Lynch come and speak about her experience as a prisoner of war the early days of the Iraqi invasion. And she's written a book, and her story is extremely compelling. And as we publicize this, I've heard her talk myself, and so I've heard her story, and I've read her book, and I understand what happens. But there's a lot of things out there about people that have this and get some notoriety because they are an example of what took place. And there's some stuff that people share and spread that just isn't right. And to hear her story is very, very, very compelling.
Well, I would love to have her on their show.
That would be a wonderful show for you to have. She'll be coming into town on Friday in the morning. Maybe I'll give Glenda a call while she's in town.
That'd be great, because that's got to be harrowing to be a woman in the Middle East, where it's not the same thing as not Candace anymore. If you're a woman in the Middle East, it's a whole different ball game, and being a POW on top of that.
Well, let me just give you a piece of her background, and I will not share her entire story, but she was like 18, 19 years of age. She lives in West Virginia. I believe she was living there at that time. I think she lived there all of her life. And the recruiter came to her house to talk to her older brother, probably 2-3 years older than her. And during the conversation, as it turned out, he did go in the Army and has I think he's still in. He's had an entire career, over 20 years. But while the recruiter was talking to her brother, she turned to her mother and she said, "I'm going in." And she was about 18, 19 years of age. So when this incident happened to her, she was a PFC.
Wow.
Think about that. Wow. And I will not share any more of her story because to listen to it from her in her words is just absolutely compelling. But I can tell you this, when I was 19 years old, if this happened to me, I'm not sure you'd be talking to me.
Man.
So, and how it ended and things like that just makes you wonder. And you look at her, and she's a lovely person. And the one thing I will tell you, one of the things as we've been making a plan for her to come to town, she says, "Well, I'm not sure if I'm driving or if I'm flying. Depends on whether I have to have this operation on my foot." She's still being treated for injuries 20 years later.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yes. So we're quite proud and pleased to have her joining us that evening. The main thrust of the evening is those three things: the wall, and then that's in Marseille, and showing that and sharing that experience with everyone in the room, and then these two speakers to kind of set the tone for the thank you. And today, when I talked to the National Guardsmen, probably about 100 of them were in the room when I talked to them. I didn't, share a whole lot of information, but I said, I'm a Vietnam veteran. It took a long time for me to even say I was in Vietnam when I came home and put my uniform away immediately. And I said it was literally, I got home in 1969, and it was 12, 13 years before I could even talk about it. And I didn't have bad duty. I'm not trying to paint a picture that I was in the jungle, and crawling around. I did not have bad duty. But because of the attitude in this country when I came home, nobody really wanted to talk, and nobody really cared. And it took a long, long time for this country to understand that no matter whether they liked the politics or not, I still went and did my job. And today, we want to do this for the Vietnam veterans like myself, want to do this for the Middle East veterans so they don't have to live their lives the way we had to live ours.
What do you think? How did it change? Like from your memory, because Vietnam, I was born in '74, so Vietnam was pretty much over at that time. And then I was in high school when Operation Desert Storms took off, and then I just got out of the military, and when 2001 when 9/11 occurred.
Sure.
So
okay. So
when did the psyche change from your perspective, where people were finally accepting Vietnam vets?
Sure. Well, the first thing, of course, is the politics that permeated the country at that time. They got tired of the Vietnam War. They got tired of seeing 20, 30 guys killed a day, reading that in the newspaper, and it bothered a lot of people, and they didn't know how to express themselves, so they started to demonstrate, and that's what made it very ugly when we returned. But here's a big difference. As they go deploy today, and I won't say every single time, but the majority of the times and the experiences I've heard about is a whole unit going and deploying for 9 months or 10 months or 12 months or whatever, but it's a unit. Guys that have trained together for, maybe they're in the National Guard together, or they're assigned to Fort Polk, Louisiana, or wherever, and they mobilize that whole unit, and they hop on planes, and they go, and they're together. When I went, I got on an airplane with about 270 people on it, and I didn't know a soul on that airplane.
Really?
And I was assigned as a person to a unit, so when I got off that airplane, I went to a holding area. They changed my orders from one unit to another unit. got me halfway to where I was going, and I had to sit for 2 weeks and wait for the highway to be cleared to get to my unit because it was during the Tet Offensive when I arrived.
Wow.
That doesn't happen today because they're sending whole units at a time and coming home as whole units at a time.
Yeah.
And I'm telling
that's
you,
all I've ever known.
I came home. I was the only guy on the plane coming home, but I knew one other guy in that plane.
Weird. Like why how do you understand how logistically you put that together? So you went to, I'm assuming you went to basic and then you did your AIT, and then from AIT they said, okay, these are your orders, you're going to go here.
I'm going to Vietnam.
Wow.
And I was assigned to the 9th Infantry. That's the paper I had in my hand. When I landed at an airport that was north of Saigon called Benoit, they had what was called a holding station there where you slept for a couple nights while they finalized your orders. Well, when they looked at my orders, they said, no, we don't want to send you to the 9th Infantry. We're going to send you to the 1st Signal Brigade, and the headquarters for this unit is in Saigon. And that's where I went. And then once I got there, my final orders was about 5 miles away from where I was, maybe 10 miles away. And we couldn't get through because the highway was fighting going on because of the Tet Offensive. So I stayed at the holding area for my final assignment for probably a week to a week and a half until the road was clear. And I got to my unit as a replacement for a person who was already gone.
Wow.
And so that's how they were moving people. Now, that's not to say that as we first started to build up in Vietnam, we didn't ship whole units over. We absolutely did. A lot of them went over on boats.
I'm assuming like the 101st Airborne probably went as a unit.
Sure.
I think.
Sure. And so when they got there, that's fine. But today, if they send the 101st Airborne or pick any unit you'd like, they know when they get them ready and start going through their manpower allocation that nobody's going to be ending their tour during the next 9 months while these guys are over in Iraq or Afghanistan or Kuwait or wherever it may be. But back then they didn't look that deep. So if a guy went over with the 101st Airborne, they'd probably check to make sure they had more than 6 months to go. And then when they got to their time to leave, they said, hey, we got to replace this guy. So they'd go to that pool I'm talking about, look for somebody who had the right MOS, and maybe change their orders and send them to replace that guy at the 101st.
Wow.
One at a time. That part I think is a huge difference because that unit is a much more cohesive thing and take care of each other, because they know each other.
Right, exactly. So like you're with, it's like being in a temp at a temp agency or something. It's like
exactly correct.
With one guy one day, the next thing that guy's gone, and then and the
somebody new's there.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing is, and this is one thing which is a blessing. It's a blessing, but it's bittersweet, which is the fact that casualties, deaths have decreased substantially over the last 30, 40 years. Vietnam, like 56,000 people died. But during, Iraq and Afghanistan, a 20-year war, just like Vietnam was a 20-year war, we lost less than 7,000 people. But you have a lot more people who are coming back home who are paraplegics. They don't have their legs, their arms. The technology's gotten to the point where if we just get to you within a certain amount of time, because I was in a medical company, it can save your life. But
exactly correct.
But your body might not be the same after that.
Let me explain to you. So first off, you're correct. Probably a lot more amputees and missing limbs, for sure. The other thing that is different, you guys today, are suffering from bad water and burn pits. But we had burn pits over there. They just never even identified that was a problem. Never came up. We had the same pit burning in the middle of my unit that you guys are talking about today, but never was it discussed when we came home that we might have been exposed for 12 months to a burn pit in my unit. My unit had about 1,000 guys. I can guarantee you could see the smoke rising every single day. And so that's one thing that was different. The other thing I think that was different is absolutely that singular thing, man. On my way home on an airplane, after I got out, I landed in San Francisco, and that's when I got flagged out of the military at that particular point because my time was so short in the military that they didn't even want to reassign me. So they let me go home. I got on an airplane flying home to Chicago on a red-eye flight at 10 o'clock from San Francisco, sat next to two sailors that were going to Great Lakes to start boot camp. And I said, boys, I'm out. You guys are going. Let's enjoy ourselves for the next 4 hours. But that was it. There was nobody around me I knew or anything like that. So that was one problem. And I think because of that, you didn't have that friend of yours that you served with that you could pick up the phone and say, hey, man, I'm hurt. Because once you came home, your guys were still in Vietnam. So today, I think that there are differences in the knowledge that we have and how we treat people and that we're looking for those injuries for people as we're helping them get out of the military. I know when the guys I talk to that are getting out of the Middle East, when they come home, they have a time of about 10 days sometimes, the guys around my house, where they go down to Texas at one of the big bases down there. Fort Hood, I think, is the one these guys go to. And they're down there for 9 or 10 days. And they have all kinds of debriefing sessions and meet with the VA down there and check them out to make sure. Now some of that is good and some of it is bad. Those guys that are coming home and they're saying, well, how do you feel, Well, if the guy wants to have a career in the National Guard or the Army and they've just finished up with 9 months, they're going to say, I'm great. Send me home. Let's get out of here. I'm ready to go, no matter what they're feeling, and that's a bad thing.
Wow. Bob Carnegie, it's always a pleasure to have you on our show. You always give us some great information, some great stories, and then also I really am looking forward to seeing that memorial for the Middle East veterans out in Indiana. So let us know.
It's in Marseille. It's in Marseille, Illinois.
Marseille, Illinois. Yeah,
yep.
That's the training facility.
And let me just tell you that if anybody wants to go to our event on the 20th, go to a website. It's called Middle East Tribute 2022.everbright.com.
That's Bob Carnegie, U.S. Army veteran from Vietnam and the Indiana State Commander of the Disabled American Veterans Service Organization. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Talk to you later.
This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.
Welcome to America's Heroes Group, with information and resources that's disseminated intentionally to empower our military population, with host Vietnam veteran Cliff Kelley, co-host Iraq veteran Colonel Dr. Damon Arnold, and co-host Army National Guard veteran Sean Claiborne. And now, America's Heroes Group.
We have in our chase bags, we have a care package of hygiene, we have shaving equipment, we have razors, and for the women we have the same personal hygiene items for them as well. And we want to say thank you for their service. This is Chase Bank. Thank you very much.
People in the neighborhood, free haircuts, and service, and food. Look good. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service.
Okay. On behalf of Cliff Kelley, America's Heroes Group, we sincerely thank Chase Bank
Welcome back to America's Heroes Group, this time with our roundtable and our partner, VETS, that is Veterans Employment and Training Service. October is Breast Cancer, Mental Health, and National Disability and Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Today is Saturday, October 22nd, 2022. Our host is Cliff Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host, Army National Guard veteran. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And we have our panelists on the line, a very distinguished gentleman, Julian Purdy. He's a U.S. Army Reserve non-commissioned officer, NCO, veteran, and Chief of Staff of the Veterans Employment and Training Service in the U.S. Department of Labor. I must say, one of my most favorite government agencies. Yeah, I said that. So then now, we're going to talk about underserved populations, HBCUs, and the Good Jobs Initiative. How you doing?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. You have a lot of stuff on your resume. We want to talk about some of the things that are going on with jobs and labor, and also some of the things you're doing with the Veterans Affairs Committee. So tell us about underserved populations, HBCUs, that's historical black colleges and universities, and also what are you doing for jobs for veterans?
All right, so that's a very loaded question. So let's start with the underserved population. And so what we're doing is we're defining that in the broadest terms possible. So we're looking at anybody who has been underrepresented, underserved in America, and we're pulling those groups out and definitely making concerted efforts to reach them and service them better. So what we're talking about is those who are in rural areas, those across all racial cohorts. We're talking about women veterans. We're also talking about veterans who are facing different economic challenges, such as those who are underemployed and those who are facing housing instability.
So when you're working with the Veterans Affairs, you participate in conceptualizing laws. So basically creating laws, coming up with the ideas of what needs to be done in military transition, employment, educational and vocational training, home loans, and homelessness. How difficult is it to affect laws?
Sure. So I think when we're talking about the laws and some of the work that I've done in regards to statutes around the economic opportunities for veterans, where we're talking about my most former role, where I was on the House and Veteran Affairs Committee, the Economic Opportunity Subcommittee specifically. And so for us to really change the landscape, it was difficult. As you probably know, Congress is a very Byzantine entity. There's a lot of rules and personalities you have to go through to get anything across the finish line. But I will say, even in these times right now, and I think we all see the landscape of America, but both sides still agree that we must do what we can for our nation's heroes. So while many other issues that are in Congress right now are stuck in gridlock and argument, the support for veterans always remains. And I was lucky enough to be on that Veteran Affairs Committee and push some great efforts through to support veterans.
So what are some of the legislation you've been able to affect so far as getting more opportunity for people to have jobs, and which really changes the whole economic landscape for a society? Right now we're going through a phase in our economy where we have crazy inflation going on. Part of the problem, or if you want to call it a problem, the Federal Reserve sees it as a problem, but that's a whole other story, is the fact that we have such low unemployment. But that is a different conversation when we're talking about having living wages. Mm-hmm. So what types of laws and things have you been able to affect to try to improve? Well, first of all, because we're talking about a market, right? We're talking about how the market actually dictates or determines whether or not a person gets X, Y, Z wage versus ABC wage. How can you make a law that actually helps that situation where a person gets a fair wage?
Yeah, so that's a little bit outside of the bailiwick of the Veteran Affairs Committee. It's more so in the Ed and Labor Committee in the House and the Health Committee, which is the Housing, Employment, Labor, and Pension Committee in the Senate. And so some of the things that they're looking at is how can we make sure that the labor standards that are the landscape of the country are upheld. We have the federal laws that govern labor, and that is the bottom level. That is the floor. You can't go underneath that. But then each state and each locality can make their own laws and rules around what someone can be paid as a minimum wage. You'll see in a lot of major metropolitan areas, the minimum wage is quite high. You know, it's above that $15 an hour that President Biden is really advocating for across the country. But then you see some states where the minimum wage is actually that federal minimum wage. And oftentimes, and you're probably aware of this as well, many people realize that that is no longer a livable wage for many people around the country. The unfortunate thing is, again, going back to that gridlock I spoke of, for that federal minimum wage to change, you need some consensus and you need Congress to agree to make that happen.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but your grandfather was a Buffalo Soldier. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So how is that history of service? Because you think about the Buffalo Soldiers, and that's to me a phenomenal story. African American men, particularly, serving a country where they still didn't have 100% freedom or got a chance to enjoy the rights of the main population. Oftentimes, even having to serve west of the Mississippi River because of the fact that they would get attacked or even by civilian populations when they're sworn in to protect and serve and defend the Constitution of the United States. So being essentially finding aggressors from within your own nation. So how is that legacy led to your dedication to your work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I'll first start by saying that my grandfather told me a story of when he was stationed at Fort Huachuca. And interestingly enough, my father was stationed at Fort Huachuca, and I was later stationed at Fort Huachuca myself. And so when my grandfather retorted this story, he mentioned that he was not allowed to live on the main post itself. Him and the other African-American soldiers had to make a camp outside of the post while the other officers and enlisted were able to live in hard buildings on the actual base itself. So, that kind of shaped my framework as I was going into the military, but it didn't diminish, my passion to serve and to support the country. I think even looking back at history around the World War II times, there was that double V campaign where we're trying to get a victory abroad and then have a victory at home. And I think oftentimes it's lost how much U.S. veterans came back home and supported the civil rights campaigns throughout history. And so I think, not only do I have a duty to serve the country as a calling of mine, but I still must continue to do that work even after I serve. So whether supporting my brothers and sisters in arms, but also fighting for equity and justice across the landscape of America as well.
So what are some specific things you guys have done for the Department of Labor, particularly for the historically black colleges and universities?
Yeah, so I will say that we are lucky to have some really great leadership right now with Secretary Marty Walsh and Deputy Secretary Julie Sue, who have really empowered me to take some of this work on. And so one of the things that we've done is we've created what we're calling the HBCU Summits. And so we are visiting, we've already visited 3 HBCUs in the summer, and we brought with us the full force of the Department of Labor. So we had representation from many different agencies coming onto the campus to talk to students and let them know what are really the different job opportunities that exist in the Department of Labor. And then while we're there, having some of these one-on-one conversations, we also have a larger program in place where we're helping break down that USA jobs process. Because for many people, even myself as an adult, after I left the military, that was a struggle for me, getting through USA jobs, trying to get, just at least an interview was a hard thing. So we actually broke it down.
Explain to us, for a lot of the people that don't know about USA jobs, explain what that is a little bit.
Sure. So USA jobs is the federal employment portal. So anybody seeking a job within the federal government, outside of a few small special cases, has to go through USA jobs. And in that, each job, you have to provide a very unique resume for that specific position. And then you are kind of waiting and seeing on whether you're selected to go to different rounds in the interview process. Sometimes you may go for months without hearing anything. And sometimes for people without that awareness, that could be a frustration that leads you not to go back and apply again and again and again, because most people do not get selected on their first time. So we really try to break down what that process looks like from the HR perspective on our side of the fence for those students, so they have a better understanding of when they're applying for federal jobs.
And what kind of success have you seen from your work so far?
So we have some students apply. We haven't necessarily had any students who have come on board yet. We're talking to students who are still in college right now. So a lot of them aren't ready for that full-time career just yet, but we are at least excited that some of them are applying for some short-term opportunities like internships, and which that is something we want to kind of expand within the Department of Labor as well. Our program is very limited right now, but again, being empowered by our leadership, we're going to try to expand that and do more for college students.
Now, a few years ago, you participated in a conference at the University of Chicago. That was I had my notes here. There was the Veteran Symposium, the second part 2 of Removing Barriers to Access. So that was in March of 2021. What were some of the things you learned at that symposium? Because you're one of the key speakers there. And then how have you applied what you've learned to what you're doing at the Department of Labor?
Yeah, so I think one of the barriers that we learned about and we heard from some of the folks at the symposium is sometimes we have to break through some of the stigma and or trauma that folks have faced in the military to make sure we can meet them and deliver our message properly. Actually, at the symposium itself, I spoke of trauma that I faced while I was in the military, which led me not to have a full career. I don't necessarily have to go into too much of that right now, but I will say that, not everybody leaves the military with, a sunny disposition of the federal government and how the military works.
You said what? We said they don't leave the military with what? I didn't get that part.
Of a sunny disposition.
Okay.
Or, about the military or how the federal government works. So sometimes we have to let everybody know that sometimes these things are isolated incidences, and there's opportunities for you to succeed even when you face adversity.
I think that's really important that people have to understand that, it is hard for civilian people. I remember I had an incident when I was in college where my mind just wasn't there. When I got back from AIT, I didn't know what was going on with me. I couldn't understand what I was thinking or what I was going through. I was just going through motions, it seemed like. I was getting up every day and doing PT at 4:30 in the morning. I was trying to go to class. I couldn't focus in class, and then I'm just dropping all my classes. And a teacher just went off me one day because she's like, "You missed like a whole bunch of classes. What's wrong with you? Whatever. You're gonna fail this class. You're gonna drop out of school. What are you gonna do?" And she just went off, and that triggered something in me. I didn't do anything like rash or didn't react in a negative way, and I still had not quite figured out what was going on with me psychologically, like why I couldn't function quite 100%. Because all I did was just go to EIT for all I knew. I mean, I was on Sunday night, I left Fort Jackson. Monday morning, I was back in class. So I think so having civilians understand what is like to go through that military process and some of the things, so what I went through and just going through training, imagine a person who's gone through a tour of duty or going through a deployment. So that being said, there seems like there's a lot of things that civilians can learn from the military population, and it's good that you're doing these types of work, especially these types of symposiums you did at University of Chicago, the type of work you're doing at the Department of Labor, but try to get people to understand and also help students understand when they're going through these processes, because nobody explained to me that, hey, you might feel like a fish out of water when you come back home, or things might be a little bit different, because you're in this regiment and you're doing this, you're doing that, and then you're being told what to do every day, and it's an intense environment. Then all of a sudden you go back to civilian life, and it's going to be a whole different thing. Nobody explained to me that might be something that my mind might go through or touch. So my question to you is, so when you're looking at the work that you're doing as far as legislation, what types of laws or what types of things need to be done as far as projects in the future from the Department of Labor to try to address these issues, particularly when we're talking about equity and opportunity for employment?
Yeah, so I think you brought up a really great point, and I just want to touch on that for a little bit. When folks are transitioning out, whether it's reserves, National Guard, or active duty, I feel like the process is all the same. I'm a reservist myself. I served for 8 years, and every time I left active duty, there was a little bit of a rub. The military lifestyle is very different from the civilian lifestyle. And I think we have a really great opportunity within the Department of Labor to liaise and to really teach and inform those in the business community what it means to provide not only opportunities for veterans, but also in a climate where veterans can thrive. And so we have a higher veterans medallion program, and we're actually getting ready to go into the season where we have an award ceremony for that. But that recognizes organizations that support veterans by making sure they have at least 7% within their workforce, and they retain 75% year to year. But part of that award also for these large companies requires them to have a veterans affinity group within that workforce. So it allows veterans to meet each other, be peer-to-peer coaches for each other, and kind of, take some of that edge off of that rough transition that most people face. As you said yourself, going from Sunday to Monday, it's a whole different lifestyle change, but not a lot of people can imagine that. And so sometimes it takes another person who's been through that experience to help shepherd you through it.
So what do you see of the future? What are some of the future projects the Department of Labor is working on in that same area?
Yeah, so one of the things we're working on right now is we have the off-base transition training pilot. And so what we're doing is we're providing some of the same curriculum, information, resources that are available in the Transition Assistance Program for those who are transitioning out of the military outside of the base. So those people can find those resources in local communities. Also, what we're doing is more recently, we've embarked upon a study, and this is going to hit to your diversity question as well, looking at what does it mean for certain cohorts of veterans once they transition. Right now, we look at certain economic metrics, see how everybody is doing. But those economic metrics don't always tell the story. And so we want to do a more holistic study on veterans to see what's happening.
So then now, do you see the road ahead as bright as far as getting people to understand and to help veterans find suitable employment, but also transition easier? What things, and also part two of the question would be also what things need to be done? Could you recommend for the Veterans Administration, or even in the civilian world, to make that transition easier?
Yeah, I think one thing that can make the transition easier, again, is just having resources in the community and knowing how to navigate those resources. I believe the metric is often quoted that there are over 4,400 nonprofit organizations that provide services to veterans. That's across the country. But then if you go to Pacific community, there's still most likely hundreds of nonprofit organizations that are thriving in that particular environment. And so as a veteran, how do you know which one to go to, which one is going to be adequate for your specific needs? So I think us making sure we can have great connections to those in the community, those who have wraparound services, local government, because they also provide services and programs as well, that's going to be a big help. I think also with that as well is, again, educating and informing the business community on why this is important.
I like that idea of educating the business community. I think that's something that's really important. A lot of people have the idea, it seems like with employers particularly, that the skills that you learn in the military are not necessarily transferable into the civilian world. Can you speak to that a little bit? And then, and is that a myth, or is that something that's had some kind of truth to it?
So I've heard that time and time again, that those skills don't necessarily translate from the military side to the civilian side. And I'll just give you a quick example of one job that most people overlook, and that's being somebody within the infantry. Everybody looks at that as, hey, you're on the front lines, you're shooting guns. What can you bring to this office environment? But people neglect the soft skills that are needed to be in the infantry. You need to be a team leader. You need to be able to be attention to detail. You need to be able to make sure you can guide and also be able to think on your feet. I mean, there's no other more dynamic situation than a battlefield. So when things happen, you're thinking on the fly, you're communicating with your team, and you're getting things done. Why would you not want that to be in your workforce? So those are the kind of skills, again, we need to make sure everybody understands that people are training year in, year out in the military so we can make sure we thrive in those environments. But in doing so, there are other more technical skills that do have more of a direct translation. So if someone is working in the cybersecurity space, sure, they can go right into that career. But the one thing that's also missing sometimes is the certification and credentialing process. Someone may be doing that job in the cybersecurity space for years, but when we go to the civilian side, they say, hey, you don't have enough experience. Well, you can't get more secure than the federal government, I would say. Yeah. But how do companies recognize that even without credentialing and licensing? So that's one nut we're trying to crack right now. But I will say we are trying to do better and making sure those in service do get that credentialing and licensing necessary to be recognized by the civilian sector.
So what drives you every day to do the work that you do at the Department of Labor? Because it seems like it's a very trying job from looking at it from the outside. It seems like there's a lot of pressure, and like I said, like there's a lot of things you really can't control. You're trying to affect things around you, but you don't necessarily. You're not like you're a ruler and you can just go in there and decree this to be done. You have to work within the confines and the variables that you're dealing with. So how do you deal with that every day?
Yeah, and you know what? And I'll take this back to the battle space. You know, we have to look at what's available to us resource-wise, who is around us, and then we start working within those confines. So who are we working with? And that's usually the business environment and the business community. So how do we talk to them to make sure our message meets them where they are? Because obviously the businesses have a very specific goal in mind, and that's to make profits and to move and gain more in the market share. And so we have to go to them and tell them how veterans can do that. And we have time and time again have many cases and examples of success across different sectors. We have convening power where we can bring in not only those business community, but we can bring in other entities within the Department of Labor. We can bring in the Department of Defense. We can bring in the Department of Veteran Affairs. And we have a very holistic conversation where we lay out all the resources that are available to, one, help train folks in that workforce, and also how to get them, those companies themselves, actual resources as well to do some of the training if that is what they so want. So the thing is how do we, to your point, use those dynamic situations and make the most out of it? And that's what we do every day in the uniform.
Wow. Really great work you guys are doing. Any last words about the Department of Labor, what you guys are doing this year?
Well, as I already mentioned, we have our Hire Vets Medallion program coming up here in the near future. That's going to be on November 9th. I believe people can tune into that virtually. But I'm really excited about some of the great work that we're embarking on. We're going to do a really large customer experience project we're launching soon. As I said, we have this study on veterans that's going to look at them more holistically, not just the economic metrics that we do from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But I'm really excited about all the work we're doing, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Employment Navigator and Partnership Pilot Program that we just started back in April, and that's been going really well so far by all accounts. So I'm excited to be doing this work, and I'm glad that you can be here and we can talk about this.
This one, in about 10 seconds, tell us about the Employment Navigator. That's a really important point because that's a tool that you can use to find jobs. Tell us this about 10 seconds about what that is.
Sure. Very briefly, as military members and their spouses are transitioning away from the military, we do one-on-one career counseling with them as they're walking out the gate. And what we also do is we will connect them to partners in the community to make sure that any additional resources they need, even after they're no longer seeing us, they can get it.
Really appreciate your time. That's Julian Purdy, Veterans Affairs Committee. He is the U.S. Army Reserve NCO and Chief Staff of Veterans Employment and Training Service in the U.S. Department of Labor. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
My pleasure.
What a phenomenal show. To
really
have
good.
a great partner like Vets Employment and Training Services, U.S. Department of Labor. Mm-hmm. That's a home run hit. Yeah, because that's that life after military.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's
it's
the backbone of the economy. That's what keeps your economy going.
Exactly. And it's so important to transition them out back into a area where they can acclimate and feel comfortable to come back in and use the skills. The skills. So phenomenal show. We also had a great show today with Veterans Legislative Voice, also National Association of Drug Court Professionals, and Disabled American Veterans State of Indiana. Please feel free to call America's Heroes Group at 312-803-2618. We're located at 155 North Wacker Drive, Suite 4250, regarding questions or comments. You can always see the show again on YouTube Live. Just search America's with apostrophe S Heroes Group, and you can always listen to us on our podcast, just in case you didn't get some information or you missed the show. So we are so always grateful and thankful for our live viewing Facebook, YouTube streaming audience, and we appreciate you all listening to us globally. It makes a difference. To our print media partner, Mrs. Dorothy Lavelle and the Chicago Crusaders, you can always read that fabulous article about Cliff Kelley, Colonel Dr. Damian Arnold, Sean Claiborne, and America's Heroes Group. Please call Mrs. Dorothy Lavelle of the Chicago Crusader at 773-752-2500 and request a subscription. To Lady J, our best technical producer, to the best digital media producer in the world, Ivan Ortega of Scott's Arna Production, and the greatest co-host, one of them I should say, Dr. Arna is the other one, but Sean is one of the greatest co-hosts of America's Heroes Group. Yes, you bringing it and delivering.
I try my best.
You just like U.S. Mail, you deliver. Everyone, please, wintertime is here. Please get yourself healthy, get boosted, get immune, get your immune shot. Please, please, please. Let's have a wonderful, productive holiday season coming up with Veterans Day, and November is Military Appreciation Month, Family Appreciation Month, and Christmas. So let's get ready so we can stay healthy and enjoy the holidays and all those things coming up. From America's Heroes Group, have a wonderful, blessed weekend.